We live in a country where politicians are more afraid of voters than voters are of politicians. That's how we want it. That feels filthier. That feels like a grosser part of rock and roll, but not what I think. And you know that.
Over to you, Chris.
Like, I don't know.
What if he's still around?
Cool story, comma, bro.
Welcome, everybody, to Whole Hog Politics. My name is Bill Sammon, joined by my old pal, Chris Stirewalt. Chris, how are you doing today? I assume you're living the dream as usual.
Why fight it? If it's so, it would be harder to resist living the dream. So I'm just going with it.
I want to talk, Chris. I want to cover a lot of ground today, but I want to start by covering something. Well, I want to talk about your old pal, and I'm talking about Ben Sasse, because he gave a very poignant interview this week. In fact, it's probably the best thing I've seen in a very long time. Of course, for those who don't know, Ben Sasse is the former Nebraska Republican senator who shocked the political world back this past Christmas by announcing at age 53 that he has terminal cancer. You introduced Ben Sasse to me, Chris, about, I think, a little more than a decade ago. I remember you brought him into my office and you presented him, and there was this, this principled, conservative, intellectual guy who's also super funny, down to earth, very, very nice fella. In fact, in those days, there was actually a fair amount of talk about Ben Sasse running for president, which I think would have been really interesting to see. Anyway, he gave a couple of interviews this week, including one with Peter Robinson of the Hoover Institution. I want to play a clip for you, Chris, and get you to react. This is him talking about the phrase "redeem the time," which the Puritans used to use, but it really, I think, has its origins in Scripture. So let's watch this clip of Ben Sasse explaining what he means by redeem the time, and I want to get your reaction on the other side of it.
Redeem the time, in my theology, means it is a great blessing to be able to live a life of gratitude to God by doing stuff that tries to benefit your neighbor. It is a blessing to get to be co-creators, but we don't build any storehouses that last. The things that matter and endure are human souls and things way bigger than any of my projects. That doesn't mean we should be neither triumphalist nor despairing, right? Like nothing we build is going to last, but that doesn't mean nothing matters. The chance to love your neighbor and serve is a blessing, and that's what the Puritans meant by redeem the time. I was given 90 days to live in mid-December. I got into this clinical trial. It's really aggressive. We'll live a lot longer than 90 days, but don't know how many months that is. But whether you have 90 days or 12 months or 12 years or 75 years left to live, we're all going to be pushing up daisies. And so it seems like trying to figure out what the important things are, what the eternal questions you need to wrestle through, what it looks like to see the relationship between sin and death in a broken world. And yet the chance to hug on my wife this morning and to love my kids and to reflect on some important questions with my friend Peter, those are pretty good ways to redeem the time.
Chris, your thoughts?
Well, I guess, for there are like, I don't know, 75, 80 million Christians in the United States. So for a lot of them, this week included Ash Wednesday.
Yeah.
And the sermon at my church on Ash Wednesday talked about the associate pastor who was giving the sermon was talking about going to a temple in Japan, and that there were all of these little idols, these little gods that were all sort of disused and worn down and broken because they had been there for a long time. And in front of all of them, people had put little offerings, right? Little tokens. And he said something that struck me, and it certainly struck me in the context of what you're talking about and the stuff that I'm doing with my friend, is that's just hedging your bets. And in life, we hedge our bets. That's what we do. We have a lot of little idols that we say, like, well, fame or career or whatever these little things that we think might save us. So we distribute our tribute around to all of these little things in the belief that maybe one of these is going to hit for us, sort of like playing a bunch of different lottery numbers. But that's not actually what we're supposed to do. Charles Krauthammer waited a long time to write a book, and he eventually did. It was just a compendium of his past columns.
Yeah.
But the first 100 pages or whatever, 75 pages, were an essay for the first time that I was aware of in my friend's life, that he had talked about becoming paralyzed, about his own journey ideologically from Carter Democrat to conservative, all of that stuff. And the name of the book was Things That Matter. And I think the constant, George Orwell said that to see the nose on one's face requires a constant struggle. Yeah. And fish don't know they're wet. So our job in life as adult human beings, whatever we do, is to figure out that we are wet in this water, that we are alive in this world, and then figure out what are the things that matter and store up our treasure there, not hedge our bets.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I watched it last night on the couch with my wife, and it was so much better than any television show or movie. I mean, I would recommend anyone watching this podcast to look up this interview with the Hoover Institution and Ben Sasse. There's so much wisdom in it, and there's so much to take away. You really come away inspired from this guy who's at the end of the line, and yet he's got gallows humor. He's self-deprecating. He talks about how he's so humble. He talks about how he has fallen short as a father and a son, and as a husband, as a worker, as a truth teller. And he talks about, again, what matters. He talks about you can play a lot of basketball in the final 60 seconds of a game, which is a wonderful way for him to put it, because of course he's a sort of a frustrated wannabe coach, right? Instead of ending up in politics and all that kind of thing. But anyway, what a great guy. I hope to hear more from Ben in the months ahead. A fantastic voice that I think is really kind of a balm for America at this moment. Chris, on to other topics. You wrote, as usual, a certified banger of a column this week. You talk about the midterms, but you talked about something really interesting. You talked about how anti-Epsteinism is going to be a kind of a main theme of the Democrats going into the midterms, which I had never really thought about it as in quite that way. But I think you're spot on. But let me read a small paragraph that you wrote in your column that I think sums it up. Quote, Democrats have learned to accept the collateral damage of some of their own as part of a scandal that is working so powerfully against Republicans. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are set to testify at the end of next week behind closed doors before the House Oversight Committee. The former president's reputation for sexual misconduct is already so legendary, especially after Me Too reframed his assignations with a 21-year-old White House intern, that there's probably not much damage left to do there, but Republicans will certainly try. Chris, my question, or two questions to you, are, will the anti-Epsteinism work as a political strategy? And two, you and I have talked a lot about how much the economy is going to factor into this election, as it does in so many elections, pretty much most elections. And this is maybe a cynical question, but let me ask it. Is it possible that the Democrats are putting a few more eggs in the Epstein basket because, as we touched on last week, the economy is kind of starting to look okay, heading, we're still some months away from the midterms. Is that a possibility?
Well, I guess I would say, do you remember in the home stretch of the 2024 presidential election, Democrats seized on the Project 2025
oh, yeah.
And at the Democratic National Convention, they brought out, a big prop-sized, oversized book of Project 2025, and they talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. The median persuadable voter did not know what Project 2025 was.
It didn't stick, did it?
And it needed a lot of explanation.
Yeah.
And of course, Donald Trump, who would go on to actually do a lot of it, said, I don't know what that is. I've never heard about it. I don't have anything to do with it. And then would later go on to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Democrats said, well, he did it anyway. It's like, well, yeah, it's politics. He may have lied. He may have misled people about what his intentions were governing. So Democrats tried that and it failed. Because it was, the horse had to jump 2 different fences to get in. They first had to get people to think about it, and then they had to make the message.
When you're explaining, you're losing.
Jeffrey Epstein. So we've had, I forget the date that Pam Bondi brought the right-wing influencers to the White House to give them the binders. But it's got to be a year, right?
Yeah.
It's
at least
it's got to be. It was early days.
Yeah.
Of the second Trump administration, and it has been a year in which that story has never, ever, ever left the news.
Yeah.
It has never left the news. It has not left the news for a variety of reasons.
Well, even now you got Prince Andrew.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Arrested.
So there's a lot that the administration could have done differently to mitigate and minimize the consequences of this. But now, I was talking to a reporter from the FT, and he was asking me about this. And I said, they had a wolf by the ears. The Republicans they loved what the Epstein story was doing for them. It was a 5th issue, 6th issue in the stack of Republican issues for 2024. The mysterious suicide, maybe, of Jeffrey Epstein, and all of the things that pointed to things that were actually true that Republicans were saying. And they liked it because it was about the Clintons and it was about left elites, because Jeffrey Epstein is a Democrat. And so it's that side. And so they used it. And then as soon as they tried to release the ears of the wolf, it turned around and bit them in the face. And it's a story that I certainly take the argument of people who say, we will regret doing this, and this sets a bad precedent and the destruction that it visits on people's lives. And I'm not saying that that's a meritless case, but I am saying that the inability of Republicans and the administration to think this through made it all much, much, much worse. And then you see the former Duke of York arrested. Wow. You see Bill Gates made a pariah. Nope, Mr. Gates, you're not welcome here. We don't want you to come to our conference.
He just canceled some appearance.
Big thing in India.
Conference.
He was supposed to go and talk about all of this stuff, and he's out. And the Wall Street firms are firing, dumping. And I guess I would put it this way. It's not whether or not Democrats are going to get the Epstein story to work against Republicans, because it already is. The question is, can they maximize? Can they capitalize on this? And I think what you heard from John Ossoff down in Georgia in his campaign kickoff speech.
And he talked about basically framing it as an anti-Epsteinism. He talked about the elites, right?
That's right. And what he did was he took Epstein, used the term Epstein class. He didn't invent it, but he certainly popularized it.
That was the term.
And talked about class warfare, but with this as what kind of people are these? And Epstein class is, the problem for Donald Trump and the problem for Republicans, there was a lot of reporting. Mark Halperin broke the story, but it's gone on from there about the big briefing that Susie Wiles and Tony Fabrizio and sort of the Trump political team did for Republicans, congressional Republicans, about how we're going to get through this year. And what are we going to do? Climate's bad. What are we going to do? The only thing I read in the coverage, and maybe there was a long section on it, it wasn't discussed, but the only thing I read in the coverage was basically that told them Epstein files don't matter. The Epstein story doesn't really matter because the all caps issue for November is the economy. This is a Marxist kind of way of thinking. And I don't mean that politically. I mean it as a mode of analysis.
Yeah, right.
As a mode of analysis to say what matters to people. It's the economy. Now, first of all, the economy, I don't know if you saw the fourth quarter GDP numbers from last year. Meh. Right. So like the good news that Republicans have to sell on the economy is that it's a little better than it was, and it's not as bad as people said it would be.
Yeah.
But prices on groceries and the grinding on those marginal voters. So they're in a quandary. There may be no way out, right? There may not be some way to save. I can't imagine there's a way to save the House. But the Senate,
I agree with that.
The Senate's very much on the line now, right? The Senate is very much on the line. And I think the Republicans need a better answer on not just Epstein qua Epstein, but on the idea of the Epstein class, of the idea of all the billionaires and the people who were at the president's inauguration and all of the swells and all of the Bitcoin bros and everybody else, because that's the kind of populistic attack that works.
Yeah.
It's about class resentment. It's about all of that stuff. And Epstein puts the stinger on it, and it connects it to an idea that voters already know about.
I agree with that. Although I will say it's a little complicated in that it's not, Trump saying it's not like Republicans versus Democrats. It's an anti-elite message, as you say. And again, as you listed, Bill Gates is a Democrat. Prince Andrew, I'm assuming, was left of center.
No,
is left
no
of no.
way.
I mean,
his brother, yes, but
Bill Clinton is a Democrat. So but I think that that's one of the great things about your column is you've talked about this before about the willingness of Democrats to endure that collateral damage on their own side. If the bigger goal is let's hurt Trump, hey, if we gotta throw Clinton under the bus and a couple others and Bill Gates, who cares, right?
One of the ways that Republicans won in 2016 was by throwing the Bush family onto the pyre, right? It was like, okay, fine, who cares? Bush is George
W.
Bush.
Service of the greater goal here, right?
Whatever. They became willing, and I'm sure some of it had to do with resentment of Jeb Bush for trying to be the third Bush president. But it was like, oh, there's a dynastic thing happening on the Democratic side. And we've got Donald Trump who says George W. Bush should have been impeached for not taking the oil out of Iraq after the U.S. invasion. Okay, like we'll make that sacrifice. And we've talked about it before in the context of what Democrats are doing now. When Democrats were like, all right, Al Franken, this may be a little unfair for you, but in order to beat Roy Moore down in Alabama, we need the high ground. So you got to go. Yeah. And what I'm watching Democrats do right now is exactly what you say, which is Larry Summers, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates,
right?
Whatever. Like, let it burn. Logs on the fire, because Democrats really want to win the Senate, and they can taste it now. And if this is the price of being able to maximize this issue, they'll pay it.
Chris, I should let me do a little housekeeping here. I want to mention, first of all, that you and I both work at The Hill and News Nation. You, of course, are the author of Whole Hog Politics, the must-read political newsletter that appears each week at thehill.com. And maybe we have the QR code. We can put it up on the screen for your newsletter. That's not what we're looking for, but there it is. That big, beautiful QR code. If you scan this, folks, you get this incredible newsletter for free each week. But I want to switch to another.
No, before you go, I want you to switch, but we are trying to name the hog. You see the little hog, the picture of the hog.
Oh, name that particular hog.
We're trying to. He needs a name. He or she needs a name. It might be. I can't see the tusk length. I don't know how. I don't want to gender or misgender this hog, but we've heard James K. Pork. We've heard Abraham Lincoln. The suggestions have come in. Prudence for jurisprudence. We've heard some suggestions, and we are open to anybody's suggestions. So you can email us. You can definitely email us.
Normal, cute pet names like Waffles. You're not looking for. You're looking for bacon related.
We may get to the point where we have to do a poll. And that's possible. But I love that hog. He or she is a great looking animal, and
it really is.
It's adorable. So
by the way,
name that hog.
Anyone who's dialed into this podcast right now, and in fact, if you are actually kind of joining in and lining up to ask a question, and we are going to take questions, live questions, at the end of this in just a few minutes on these and many other topics. In fact, I'm going to put up another QR code. Now, this QR code right there over your shoulder, Chris, if someone scans that QR code, they'll be able to go into a link that will give them access to get in and ask a question. You could type your question in the chat. And by the way, if you have a suggested name for the hog,
get it in there.
You could type that in the comment section too. But I encourage anyone watching right now to scan that QR code, get in on the conversation, ask Chris Stirewalt a question in front of America. Or name the hog in front of America.
Do you get a tote bag or anything? I feel like now you tell them what they get a collection of PBS coffee mugs.
We could get some swag going.
Maybe we'll just think
some
about
hog swag. Okay, Chris, a lot of stuff I want to cover in a very short time, and a couple of these things are previews of what's about to happen. A couple of them domestic, and then I want to get to international. But domestically, we got the Supreme Court within the next hour, less than an hour, maybe a half an hour from now. We're going to see the Supreme Court issue some opinions. Now, I don't know whether this is the day that they issue an opinion on the tariffs case or the trans case, but those are the two biggies that we're waiting for. And if they don't issue them today, they're probably going to issue maybe one of them at least next week, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, probably Wednesday. Let's start with tariffs. How big is the tariff? Well, let me ask it this way. What political significance will it have coming into the midterms if the Supreme Court rules that Donald Trump overstepped his authority by unilaterally imposing all sorts of tariffs all over the joint, and therefore the tariffs suddenly are wiped out? In other words, they just go away. What does that do politically in terms of the midterms?
So the effective tariff rate, and I don't know exactly what it is right now because it's volatile.
17?
Yeah, the effective tariff rate in the United States is 17% tax on imports. And we know that 90% of it is paid by Americans, and we see the drag effect on the economy. But it ain't 256% or whatever the president said it was a year ago, April.
Yeah.
And the Liberation Day tariffs have not come to pass. And they're sometimes these for example, right now, the president is talking about doing it's not NAFTA, it's HAFTA, because we're going to exclude and punish Canada because the president is trying to break Canada's will in this trade war, and maybe he'll reward Mexico and dump USMCA in favor of a new thing that doesn't include Canada. So it's volatile and it's variable. The tariffs are unpopular, right? Of all the things that we know that are unpopular for the administration, this one is a stone cold loser. Democrats don't like anything the president does, and half of Republicans hate the tariffs. So and among independents, it's, a 70-30 question. So the tariffs themselves are unpopular. The president has ended up not imposing the kinds of tariffs that he said he wanted to, and especially with China. So if the Supreme Court, the conventional wisdom in Washington right now, and I think I subscribe to it, is that Chief Justice John Roberts is trying to get the biggest majority possible. That why this has taken so long is that he wants a big majority on the Supreme Court behind a decision that speaks with real authority. So that means he doesn't want the Democratic appointees +2. He wants 7
Yeah.
or 8.
Make it more legit.
He wants it to have this real authority. Now, the administration says, the president says, fine. If they strike down my tariffs, I will rise up more powerful on tariffs than you ever knew, because we have already explored all the other ways to put tariffs into place. So here's what we don't know. There's a good story for Republicans, and I think this is the story that most Republicans in Congress have been telling themselves. They don't have to fight the president on tariffs. This anti-Canada tariff has slipped through. What will happen in the Senate? The president would obviously veto it, but like the dissent has begun. But the reason that mainline Republicans don't want to do it is because they're like, the Supreme Court is going to, Calgon, take me away. The Supreme Court is going to come in and it's going to end this problem for us. And then we'll be able to say, much as Republicans have been able to say on gay marriage and a host of other issues, well, what can you do, right? The Supreme Court has spoken, and as much as we would love to fully MAGA our MAGAs, we will not be able to do that moving on. But the president says, and his staff says, we have been figuring out how to do tariffs without this authority, and we will try those.
Yeah.
What are the consequences? I'll shut up by saying if the congressional Republicans got what they wanted, and can't really say that they want, which is for the president to get owned at the Supreme Court, and it would be useful for them as a limit on his authority generally, right?
And it would be useful for them in that the economy would get a big boost.
It would say, great, okay, moving on.
Whether Trump's happy or not, all of a sudden the economy would go up, and that might lift all Republican votes.
And and that would be good for Republicans, for the president to lose on this one, unless they really do have a mechanism to reimpose tariffs. And if the president, stung by the Supreme Court, we go back to Liberation Day and he fights this battle. We see signs from the president on any given day that he is aware of the straitened condition of his party. He said on Air Force One a couple weeks ago, talking about, he was explaining how the midterm curse works, right? It was something that I'd never heard him say before, but basically acknowledging, presidents who are in power, and he didn't say this part out loud, who are really unpopular, have really bad their parties have really bad midterm years. So he's got the causal link. He understands that. Some days he acts like that's true, and other days he doesn't, right? And it's sometimes hour to hour. So that's a very, very, very long way of saying, who knows?
Yeah. What about quickly on the transgender issue? If the Supreme Court rules that basically states can't pass laws, or local communities can't pass laws that allow biological males to compete in girls' or women's sports, what does that do politically coming into the midterms? Because again, we've talked about this many times. Democrats have got to come up with a better answer than, well, that's not that important to talk about. Let's talk about something else. At some point, you got to talk about the substance of that issue.
This is one where it's the Democrats who need a loss, right? This is one where the Democrats would politically benefit by a loss for their team at the Supreme Court and being told no. And that way,
so they could rally against what they would portray as the bias or the unfairness.
They would
right-wing court.
They would do what Republicans did on gay marriage, what Democrats have done on the matter of abortion after the Dobbs decision, where, just as you say, you now have someone to blame, and you can talk about that. But more importantly, so the problem that Democrats have on trans issues is it is a small number. The interest group is much smaller than the interest group was on gay marriage, and it's much smaller than the interest groups are on abortion. But they are vocal, they're well organized, and they are radical. And so the problem that Democrats face when trying to come up with, we watched Abigail Spanberger just be unable to engage with this question in Virginia. It turned out it didn't matter because the tide was so heavy against Republicans.
She played that card.
And so she just sort of ran out the clock on the trans question. But that won't feed the bulldog for 2028. That's not good enough.
No.
And a Supreme Court decision here would be a powerful tool for, let's say, Gavin Newsom. to say, talking to activist groups, well, I mean, that the Trump Supreme Court, these
But didn't Gavin
radicals.
Newsom himself come out on the
Yeah, well,
side of I actually oppose?
Well, you'd be surprised to hear that a politician tried to have it both ways. Gavin Newsom, and he may have updated his stance, but what I heard Gavin Newsom say was, "I get it. I get it.
Yeah,
I get
that is
why.
what he said.
I get why
I feel your pain.
people don't like it, but like, well, what are you gonna do?" And
so you're saying if the Democrats lose, it's sort of like what happened, like, what happens when the dog catches the car, right? Republicans fought so many years to overturn Roe v. Wade and finally overturned it. And then they started to realize, even though obviously they're super happy about it and continue to be super happy about it, it takes away that political cause.
Well, what it takes away is your ability to say to your own voters. So for Republicans, for almost my whole life, they were able to say, "Oh, Roe v. Wade. I'm with you, brother. But what can you do about Roe v. Wade?" And the Supreme Court said, "Okay, do what you want," which meant that pro-life activists in all 50 states were able to go to their Republican lawmakers and say, "All right, let's go."
Yeah.
Right. So like in Texas, for example, Ken Paxton, one of the reasons Ken Paxton is leading John Cornyn in their primary down there is that Ken Paxton has taken the hardest possible stance as the state's attorney general on abortion. Going to prosecute people who mail abortifacient pills into Texas. Going to go hard, right? And the Republican base digs it. How will the general electorate in Texas feel about it? And so my point is that for Democrats, if the Supreme Court rules against transgender athletes participating in male or females, I guess it's not a problem the other way, but yes, trans women, trans females participating, or trans males participating in female sports. If they do that, that puts them in the politicians in the safe row space, which is decry the decision, denounce the Supreme Court, and then be able to say to your activists, what can you do? I wish I could.
And I would say
walk away from it.
And conversely, if for some reason they were to rule the other way, that probably would help Republicans. They would really get so fired up. Chris, I want to ask you about a little foreign policy. It's going to be a big foreign policy story, I predict, in the next weeks, days, maybe, and that's Iran. In my mind, and tell me if you disagree, it's no longer a question of whether we strike Iran. It is now, to me, and I'm just speculating here, only a question of to what extent do we strike Iran. And I've already in my mind kind of ruled out the pinprick option. That doesn't seem like that's something. You don't need this much hardware to do a pinprick strike like we did to going after the nuclear facilities in conjunction with Israel a ways back. This time feels like we're looking at a sustained military pulverizing. I don't think we're talking about boots on the ground, but it sounds like we're going to beat the heck out of them, or that's what Trump wants to do, to the point of taking out leadership, maybe regime change. What is your expectation of where we're headed on Iran?
Well, I think the administration, I think the president really likes the Venezuela vibes, right? And certainly what their efforts were in Syria, which was, you find a guy, he's got maybe a little baggage, but maybe he'll be the realpolitik kind of cynical way of saying, we're not here. This is not a forward strategy of freedom. We're not here for the democracy. We're here for the United States of America, is appealing. Right. Yeah. It's something that Donald Trump can sell to his base that is very skeptical about the use of the United States military overseas. Right. The MAGA base, the America First people are not into that. That is antithetical. If you listen to J.D. Vance, if you listen to the things that people have said all this time, that's not where their head's at. So the sort of more cynical version where you're like, yeah, we're taking out Maduro, but we're not going to like let some dewy-eyed democratic revolution take place. We're going to keep the regime in power and we're going to bend it to our will. And Syria has a similar kind of story to tell. We can find bad people to do business with. And we're going to do it. And the United States used to do it. Ferdinand Marcos is not going to win any FIFA World Peace Prizes. And Manuel Noriega, Saddam Hussein himself, a Kissingerian era approach to U.S. foreign policy, often said, yeah, we'll find a bad person to do business with if that aligns with our interests. And so that's what the administration has been saying. Iran, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? I think Iran has like 90 million people in it.
Yeah. It's a whole different kettle of fish than Venezuela.
Venezuela is like Texas. It's about the size population of Texas. Iran is a big country.
Yeah.
And it's in a real rough neighborhood. And it is the cause of a lot of the problems. So I guess I would say when Jimmy Carter when the Iranian Revolution, the consequences of which the world has been dealing with for a long time, right? When that got cooking, the idea was like, well, what if we trade? And then we could go back before that and back before that. We can go back. We can go back. Yeah, we can go way back to BP and all of that stuff. Let's talk about the Ottoman Empire if you want. But the idea in Iran that you're like, I think we can sort of, Kermit Roosevelt would have told you like, oh yeah, that's what we did. We were just able to like swap this guy out for that guy. It doesn't end the way that you think it's going to end. And Iran is awful big. There is nothing like the political will in the United States to sustain nation building in Iraq. And if you blow it up, right, and there's a revolution, at minimum, the amount of aid that you would need to fund Iran and get that country back on its feet and how you would do it would be a project for 3 presidential administrations.
Yeah. We got plenty of money,
Yeah, we got no problems. We're good. Let's do this one.
Chris, I want to show. Let's play a sound bite.
Oh, look at you using the lingo.
TV
guy.
The TV SOT. I guess that stands for sound on tape. Let's play some sound on tape of President Trump talking about Iran this week, please.
And we do have some work to do with Iran. They can't have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. You can't have peace in the Middle East if they have a nuclear weapon. So now we may have to take it a step further, or we may not. Maybe we're going to make a deal. You're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days.
Oh, it's not 2 weeks anymore. It used to be 2 weeks. Now it's just 10 days.
Now it's 10 days. I think it's so interesting to he does hedge all his bets. We're either going to do it or we're not going to do it, but we're going to find out over the next 10 days.
What would happen if think about it this way. So everybody says it's coming. And in Venezuela, it ultimately did come. We built up in Puerto Rico for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then it did come. And then it wasn't a big deal. I mean, it was a big deal if you're Nicolas Maduro, but it was a surgical strike. Grab this guy, take him out. What if after all of this, what would happen to just counter argument that Trump said, we have a deal. Iran has agreed. They'll let inspectors in. They're fully getting rid of their nuclear program. And I declare peace. We are good. And I am satisfied. What happens then? What happens in the region? What happened? I mean, like we have definitely taken enough steps out on the tightrope in this matter that going forward or coming back are both perilous.
Yeah. Now I want to remind our viewers that in a moment here, we're going to start taking questions. By the way, remember in the old days, pre-Trump, there was a presidential tradition of calling on, at a press briefing, they would always call on AP as it was just this unwritten tradition. You always give the AP the first question. I think we may have a tradition here. We're going to call on Keith Clark as our first questioner because he's such a loyal viewer.
Wow.
And what we're going to get to Keith in a few minutes, and we'll get to others too who have questions. Chris, I want to touch on one other topic, and that is Zohran Mamdani. This week, he talked about the need to raise money to institute some of his policies in New York City. I think we have a SOT,
Oh
if I
my
may.
gosh, man, you just,
Enough with the SOT.
you've gone to your head.
Let's try another SOT. This one from Mamdani, please.
There are two paths to bridge this gap. The first is the most sustainable and the fairest path. This is the path of ending the drain on our city and raising taxes on the richest New Yorkers and the most profitable corporations. And if we do not go down the first path, the city will be forced down a second, more harmful path. Faced with no other choice, the city would have to exercise the only revenue lever fully within our own control. We would have to raise property taxes.
He's talking about raising property taxes. I think it's 9.5% on hundreds of thousands of ordinary working class New Yorkers. A lot of people are saying he's basically, it's like a hostage.
It is a hostage
what,
situation.
What was that old National Lampoon cover?
Buy this magazine and we'll
I'll
shoot
this
this
dog. You know, I mean, he's basically saying, hey, you know, you don't give me the money this way. You know, we want to tax the bad guys, the rich billionaires. But if you don't do that, I'll tax the you know, I mean, it's kind of remarkable to see him put it in such stark terms. And politically, I want to ask you this, because you might say, well, it's a New York story, whatever, New York's going to do what New York's going to do. But I think it has a little bit of national implications in that during the campaign that Mamdani was running, there was all of this talk about, well, this is the kind of thing that the Republicans and Donald Trump are going to love to have because it'll give them a foil and you can sort of try to portray the Democrats as all these bunch of socialists. Well, now Mamdani's in office and he's implementing his policies, and it's something to see. What's your take? You're not buying it.
Being the mayor of a city is not very ideological. Right? It's an administrative job. And it's not about like Rudy Giuliani and this is obviously a different Rudy Giuliani. Mike Bloomberg was nobody's idea of like a visionary leader that will inspire the people of New York to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
Michael Bloomberg was a very successful mayor of New York, and he was very successful and very uninspiring. No offense, Mr. Mayor, but no one was like, I just feel great about everything because I heard a speech from Michael Bloomberg. Administering a city is not very ideological. It's prudential, it's practical, and it's administrative. So Mamdani has backed off. The first thing were the housing subsidies. Nope, we're not going to be able to go ahead on the subsidies that we promised in the campaign. What are we going to do about the police? Well, Jessica Tisch is going to stay on, actually. So Mamdani has been trying to walk his own tightrope between the promises he made and practical administration. The threat that he's making here, help me tax the wealthiest, or I'll have no choice but to tax working class people on property taxes, is a real threat for the outer boroughs of New York, right? Manhattan, is Manhattan, but out in Staten Island, out in Queens, out in the faraway parts of the city, there are a lot of working class people who own their own homes, and that would be a crushing blow, for them. I think it's too soon to say. Does Zohran Mamdani want to be famous and popular, or does he want to be a successful mayor of New York? He shows signs of both. He shows signs that he's able to pivot and turn. And then I'll shut up by just saying, converting your political capital, and Zohran Mamdani had a lot of political capital. Converting your political capital into policy victories is very, very, very hard. And New Yorkers are a very unforgiving bunch when it comes to, just ask anybody who's ever been the quarterback for the Giants or the Jets, or the star pitcher for the Mets or the Yankees. What have you done for me lately? And so Mamdani is in a very difficult position, and he's trying to feel his way through it. And I don't know how much of it he'll be able to land, and I don't know how much goodwill he's going to have from voters.
Yeah. Chris, before we get to questions, there's one of our viewers, David Hill, wants to ask a question, but I got to squeeze one other topic in, and forgive me, indulge me. California's jungle primary. You've got this governor's race coming up in California where the primary the primary is the kind of thing where it's not like a Democratic primary and a Republican primary. It's just everybody is in the same primary election, and the way Democrats and Republicans are all competing against each other, and the way it works is the top 2 vote getters then go on to the general election. And as a result of this, you've got all of these different Democrats in there, Katie Potter, and I forget who all they all are.
Katie
now.
Porter, yeah.
Katie Porter and a bunch of others. And what they're doing is they're splintering the Democratic, Mayor Villaraigosa and others. They're splintering the Democratic vote to such an extent that the 2 main Republicans in the race, Steve Hilton, and then there's a sheriff,
Chad Bianco.
Yeah, they're like either the top 2 or they're 2 of the top 3 people in the race right now, according to various polls. And some have raised the possibility that, and this is so crazy, in deep blue California, because of the jungle primary and the way it's set up, it's at least possible we end up with a Republican governor, because if it turns out that the 2 top vote getters in the jungle primary turn out to be Republicans by virtue of the Democrats splitting all of the other votes up, do you think that's a real possibility, or is that far-fetched?
I will bet you. Well, I was going to bet you a steak dinner, but whatever the pescatarian's equivalent of a steak dinner is, and a good one too.
Fish.
Yes,
nice piece of fish.
A nice piece of fish. But I will bet you a big fancy dinner that there are not 2 Republicans in who come out of California's June primary.
I actually agree with that. I think it'll be probably 1 Republican,
maybe,
and 1 Dem, and then that'll clarify, and then all the Democrats will get behind that Democrat.
The biggest number in the poll. So this is an Emerson poll, is the most recent one. And it goes Steve Hilton with 17%. And then Eric Swalwell and Sheriff Bianco at 14%.
Like 13%. I added up I added up the Democrats and the Republicans, and the Democrats had 2 or 3 times the total support that the 2 Republicans
do you know what's beating everybody? Undecided. 20 more than 21 points of undecided. So I think that what will happen. So right now you have among the Democrats a lot of regional candidates, right? In your Katie Porter represented that. Tom Steyer is in the race.
Yes.
Villaraigosa, the former mayor of Los Angeles, is splitting up the same. Katie Porter's district was in the same area. Name recognition. Where do people know who these people are? You're a voter in California. You talk to a pollster from Emerson College. They say, who do you like? They start listing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
12 people. You have never heard of 9 of the people. You recognize 2 of the names, you pick 1 of the 2. What will happen is that a lot of money is going to get spent. The race will tighten, and that 21% will not be distributed evenly among these Democrats. It will be distributed unevenly. And Katie Porter, that's 10 points of support for Katie Porter that's going to go someplace else, because Katie Porter's
not going to go to Steve Hilton. It's going to go to another Democrat, the next Democrat. Right. Chris, I want to go to a question now from Mr. David Hill. I wonder if we could put David Hill up on the screen. Hi, David. How are you? Where are you calling in from?
Coming in from Lexington, Kentucky. Good morning, guys.
All right. Good morning to you.
Yeah.
What's on your mind?
We talked to you before.
Yes. Talking about money and I guess foreign policy, is the power of the purse going to make a comeback? Could you see a situation in this era where we've been on CRs and temporary budgeting issues and threatened shutdowns to where maybe a democratically controlled Congress really tries to bring a president to heel through that old school budget appropriation process? Or is that antebellum? Is that gone?
Such a great question.
Did you see the story about Tom Cole, congressman from Oklahoma, and Rosa DeLauro, congresswoman from Connecticut? And she's the top Democrat on appropriations, and he's the chairman of appropriations. And I forget who did the story, but it was a good story. I've interviewed Tom Cole a bunch of times. He's sort of they're both irresistible in their own way. They're real characters. He's a cigar smoking, bourbon drinking, old school Oklahoma kind of guy.
She's the purple hair.
She's got the purple hair.
Yeah.
She's everybody's progressive grandmother. And the story is that how Congress ended up funding 95% of the government in a rational fashion for the first time was that these two developed trust and relationship and friendship to work together to give each other the benefit of the doubt. What it will take for Congress to do its job, and the single largest problem that afflicts the Republic right now is that we don't have a Congress, right? That's our number one problem. It's not that the courts overreach or that the executive overreaches. Those things are true, but it's that the congressional, the Article 1 branch is like, go ahead. They don't fight for their own power. They don't fight for the power for the sake of having power. And there are
which the framers thought that they were going to be the preeminent branch. And so they put all these checks and balances. In fact, Ben Sasse talked about this in his wonderful interview about how, they went to all this trouble to put constraints on Congress, and Congress doesn't want to exercise its power after all.
Right. This is like somebody who won't let their kid drive, and the kid says, I don't even want to get a license.
Go ahead, David. Did you have a follow-up?
I was just going to say, but with the Democrats put their toe up to the line with this DHS funding, right? This was a policy they didn't like, and say, okay, we're not going to fund it if you don't make changes. Does that have some runway, or do you think that was more of a one-off?
No. Look, so the let's say that, and straight line projections are always dangerous. But Thomas Massie said something from your congressman from your home state, said something that was true in a recent interview. He said the primaries are in March, April, May. By the time you get to the 4th of July, most of the primaries have already been held. The moment of maximum authority for the president right now is while everybody's going into their primaries, because they cannot afford to upset the president right now. Massey's point is every primary date, and we have our first one at the first week of March, every one of those that passes is another group of Republican lawmakers who have less to fear, and many of them will have a need to make a case to a general election electorate to say, I've stood up, I held the line, I stood up for the taxpayer, I stood up for you. And I do think that within this Congress, where Republicans are going to have this razor thin majority, that more of this will take place. I think this is the beginning, not the end of that.
So there are going to be more defections as these primaries play out, starting with Texas on March 3rd and going up to the 4th of July. And then the Republicans will be much more emboldened to take on their leader. What a great question, David. Thank you so much for asking that. Chris, it looks like we're out of time already. I want to just point out to the viewers that you are also, in addition to writing the wonderful Whole Hog Politics newsletter, you also host the Sunday talk show, The Hill Sunday, which airs at 10 a.m. Eastern on News Nation, which is, by the way, News Nation really having a moment lately, really kind of jumping up in terms of ratings and all this coverage we're doing on all kinds of things. So are you excited about this week's show, Chris? You always are, but what about this week?
Okay, we're going to have a sit down with Kevin Stitt. I guess so that makes it a Stitt down. The governor of Oklahoma, who at this very moment is living through a real dramatic moment with the president of the United States. Kevin Stitt is the chairman of the National Governors Association, and he and Donald Trump have been in a fracas because Donald Trump doesn't want to let all the governors come into the White House. And Kevin Stitt says if they can't all come, then none of us can come, because that's the nature of this organization. So Kevin Stitt, I'm going to be real interested to talk to him about what it's like, because he's a real conservative Republican. He's from Oklahoma. Yeah. He does not have blue hair. And trying to figure out like how to navigate this space. We're going to talk to him. We've got a Democrat in the works. And my favorite part is Lindsay Scherfinsky is the head of the George Washington Presidential Library. Sunday is George Washington's birthday. Yeah. We are going to go down to Mount Vernon. We are going to talk to Lindsay Scherfinsky about who George Washington is, what the presidency represents as we take our road to Philadelphia, our road to 250, that we're going to talk about George Washington. We're going to get to show people a little bit of Mount Vernon, and I'm into that.
I love that so much. I dragged my family. They actually were very happy to go to Mount Vernon about a year and a half ago. And just I hadn't been there, I guess, since I was a kid, and it was so fantastic. But it was such a hot day. It was probably 100 degrees, and the grandkids were starting to melt, and we were in line to go into the mansion, and we ended up bailing on the interior of the mansion. I got to go back there.
Go back and look at the view. When you look at the view, when you walk out of the back of Mount Vernon, and you look across the Potomac, which may or may not be full of feces, but when you look across the Potomac, and they've done this amazing thing where they bought all the land on the other side of the river so that it's totally unspoiled, and you look out and you get this great sense of why George Washington was so optimistic about the future of this country, because what his view when he went home was this American landscape and this area of real promise, and it's wonderful.
Chris, before we go, I'm sorry. I promised a question to Keith Clark, and I neglected him. Keith, can we bring Keith in, because we got to get us some Keith Clark?
It wouldn't be the show without Mr. Clark. Hello, Mr. Clark.
Hello.
What's on your mind today, Mr. Clark?
Well, my question was that President Trump is now spending so much time on international issues, most of which are unpopular. Nicaragua, Canada, Greenland, Iran, the Peace Board, all of these things. Is this going to add up to any effect in the election?
It goes both ways. I don't mean this to sound as mean as it does, but it keeps him busy. And that's not for nothing, right? Because it's true that those things are unpopular, but also they're not high salience issues for voters. The Greenland thing was a real disaster, and the polling reflects it. The Greenland was a debacle from start to finish that hurt Republicans and hurt the president's approval rating, was super unpopular. Iran could end up being that too. But most of this stuff, I think, for persuadable voters, they don't engage on these issues very much. So if the president is having Board of Peace meetings and doing all of this stuff, he's not doing other things. And then the question becomes, and the president's going to go he's going to go out and campaign more. And the question is, if you're a Republican, where would you rather have Donald Trump? Would you rather have Donald Trump engage directly in these races, or would you rather have Donald Trump going to meetings of the Board of Peace? There are trade-offs.
Yeah, there's pros and cons. Thank you for that, Mr. Clark.
Good to see you, Mr. Clark.
Always appreciate you. We truly are now out of time.
Keep saying
Chris,
that.
thank you so much. As usual, let's remind our audience, I'm Bill Sammon, joined by my old pal, Chris Stirewalt. We will see you all next time on another exciting edition of Whole Hog Politics.
Suey.